I'm fairly confident that most people watching this video have at least heard of Psychonauts. I mean, it's pretty much the ultimate definition of a cult classic game. It never did well initially, but in the 15 years since its release, it has exploded in popularity. It never became a viral sensation or anything like that, but it has slowly gained attention and praise over the years. However, I'm also fairly confident that most people watching this video have never actually played Psychonauts. Like I said, it's pretty much the ultimate definition of a cult classic game. And while that means that it's garnered tons of attention and praise, it also means that it caters to a relatively niche audience. It's not exactly appealing to the masses, and while it's unique enough to grab the attention of anyone who stumbles upon it, it's not quite striking enough to keep the stranglehold on the mind of a potential player. Personally, I've known about Psychonauts for a long time, longer than I can even remember. I distinctly remember finding it on Steam one day on sale for only $1 or so, purchasing it without second thought, and never actually playing it. This one has been in my backlog for years, and I only decided to finally play it less than a month ago. It looked short, fun, unique, and I've been meaning to play it for years anyway, so I figured it would be a nice interlude between the RPGs I was playing at the time. I booted it up expecting a basic platformer that I could blaze through in a few hours, and really I was mainly just playing it so I could finally say that I had actually played Psychonauts. Within mere minutes though, I was hooked. Ever since the moment I first played it, I have been completely unable to stop thinking about this game. I don't necessarily think it's one of the greatest games I've ever played or anything, but it is definitely an experience that has stuck with me, and I know I will continue to think back to it for years to come. With that said, no better place to start than the beginning. This is Psychonauts, the debut title for Double Fine Productions. This game's marketing rode pretty heavily on Tim Schafer's name when it first released. He's not quite as big a deal in the industry anymore, but he made a name for himself at LucasArts through classic point-and-click adventure games, like Grim Fandango or Day of the Tentacle. Eventually, he left the company to create Double Fine, and here we are with him in the director's chair of their first project. Psychonauts had an extremely rough time getting published. Originally, Microsoft was set to publish it as an Xbox exclusive, but they pulled out a year before release, mainly due to creative differences between Microsoft and Double Fine from what I can tell. Simply put, Microsoft wanted to make the game a bit more traditional, a bit easier to approach for newcomers. Double Fine wanted to stick to their guns and see their creative vision realized. It also didn't help that the Xbox 360 was releasing soon, and they didn't want to spend too many resources supporting a project releasing on what would soon be outdated hardware. All of this resulted in Majesco becoming the game's new publisher. This also meant that the game would be getting ports to PC and PS2 instead of being an Xbox exclusive. When the game finally released in 2005, it sold terribly, not even shipping 100,000 copies by the end of its first year. The game earned critical praise all across the board, but that can only carry a game so far when most people interested in the gaming scene at the time didn't even know that it existed. However, like I mentioned earlier, it began to pick up more and more steam as the years went on. Word of mouth spread, and the few that had played Psychonauts were devoted to making sure others would be aware of it. Double Fine gained all publishing rights to the game in 2011 and began releasing it digitally on platforms like Steam for an incredibly low price. Even if you don't catch it on sale, the game will only cost you $10, which is not a tough price to swallow whatsoever. This new widespread affordability and availability helped the game skyrocket in popularity. As of 2015, the game had sold almost 1.7 million copies, a far cry from the initial financial disappointment. Alright, enough background information, let's dive into the game itself. Right as you boot the game up, you're smacked in the face with this title screen. It's a simple premise, but letting you walk around the title screen adds so much personality here that you simply don't find in most other games. Psychonauts immediately sets up what to expect, something unconventional and maybe not perfectly executed, but bold and unlike anything else you're likely to find. Before anything else, I want to talk about the visuals here. The whole art style feels extremely reminiscent of Tim Burton, and I'm pretty sure that's a deliberate choice. Especially looking at all the character designs, these guys look like they would be right at home in something like Nightmare Before Christmas or Corpse Bride. I always loved that kind of style anyway, so this is perfect for me. Everything else, from the color choice to the asymmetrical design of pretty much everything here, leads to a visual style that matches this game perfectly. It's colorful and vibrant, but crooked, somewhat unhinged, a little bit darker than your typical cartoon style. And the Tim Burton comparisons don't stop at the art style. I found that the soundtrack captured a lot of similar feelings as well. It's composed by Peter McConnell, and while I recognized his name from the Sly Cooper series, the style here sounds almost completely foreign from those games. I was constantly reminded of Danny Elfman listening to this. Some of these songs sound directly out of something like Beetlejuice. story in Psychonauts is honestly pretty basic. You play as this kid named Rasputin, or Raz for short, who ran away from his family to sneak into the summer camp that trains kids to become Psychonauts, basically secret agents that use psychic powers. Things start out simple enough, but it's obvious from the beginning that not everything is as it should be here. Before long, the entire camp is kidnapped and everybody has their brains forcefully removed. It's up to Raz and his unique ability to enter other people's minds to save everyone. I'll be the first to admit that this plot isn't particularly compelling, but it really doesn't have to be. The story is very much a vehicle to get you to the more interesting parts of the game that I'll touch on later, and that's perfectly okay. Not every game needs to have a gripping narrative, and I think this game in particular gets a pass because of just how good the writing is. Platformers are a genre where writing can often seem insignificant. They're usually so gameplay heavy that any form of writing is just completely tossed to the side. I don't think this is really a bad thing. I mean, just look at Mario games. These games have consistently been considered the best of their kind for decades, and the entire time Mario himself has had just about as much personality as a piece of cardboard. But nobody has ever cared because the games are just that good. Psychonauts, oddly enough, takes the complete opposite approach. The gameplay, while completely serviceable, isn't really anything all that special, for reasons that I'll get into later. The writing, however, is some of the best I have ever seen in a video game. As I mentioned earlier, Raz has a unique ability to enter other people's minds, and every level is based on someone else's mind. This can range anywhere from a camp instructor to a mentally unstable former theater star, to a fish, and all of them are handled with a surprising amount of care. What can initially seem very face value will quickly become far deeper if you're willing to look into the hidden lore, and there is a lot of hidden lore in this game. Not only through symbolism in the level design and these secret vaults that you can find, but also through this backstory document directly from Double Fine during production. This contains a ton of backstory for each individual character. It was meant to be a reference point for writers and others working on the game. Most of this stuff isn't actually brought up in the game itself, but it adds a ton of interesting layers to each character for those who are willing to look into it. For one basic example, take the level Mila's Dance Party. This level comes very early on in the game, and it's primarily a tutorial for the levitation mechanic. The whole level is pretty much exactly what the name describes, a big party. Mila is one of the heads of the Psychonauts, a cool and upbeat secret agent that seems to always be in high spirits no matter what. So it makes sense that her level reflects that. However, tucked away in a secret area, you can find her repressed personal demons. As it turns out, long before she was a Psychonaut, she used to work at a children's hospital, but one day she returned to find the whole thing burning down. Her mind was tormented by the anguished screams of the dead children, taking over and rapidly destroying her mental health to the point where she had to be admitted into a sanitarium. However, this was where she met Sasha 9, another Psychonaut who helped her refine her psychic abilities and control her inner thoughts so that she could become the confident person that we see in-game. This is reflected in the level itself by being tucked away in a hidden room, not completely drowned out but healthily controlled. It can be accessed at any time but isn't distractingly obvious, and most players will probably unknowingly skip right past it on their first playthrough. Mila has the most balanced mind in the game, evident by the complete lack of danger throughout. Even in this hidden room, her nightmares are behind bars, unable to cause any harm. Even in just this one level, there is a remarkable amount of depth and extra layers that you wouldn't even know existed if you just blazed through the game without a care in the world. And this isn't even one of the best examples. Stuff like this is everywhere, in every area of the game. It's really fantastic stuff throughout. The ability to dive directly into each character's mind is an incredibly effective tool to help develop each of the characters. I mean, there's no better way to explore someone's character than to literally delve into their inner thoughts. In addition to being surprisingly in-depth, Psychonauts is absolutely hilarious. I'll preface this by saying that the lead writer alongside Schaefer for this game was Eric Wolpaw, who went on to work on the Portal games. And just from that information, anyone familiar with those games can probably already see why I love his work here so much. Both games have a very similar sense of humor. It's edgy and dark without being cringeworthy, and it's just generally really funny. I was really surprised at how many moments in the game had me laughing hysterically. These guys in the Milkman Conspiracy level always get me. The characters around here are called G-Men and are essentially meant to represent a conspiracy theorist view of everyone around him. So they're all secret government agents playing caricatures of traditional roles in a 50s suburban neighborhood, and they're awful at hiding it. This leads to a ton of hilarious moments, such as the road crew.
I am on the road crew. This is my stop sign. Yes, we are all on the road crew. Our backs are killing us.
Or the grieving widows.
Boo-hoo. I am a sad widow. I wished my loved one had remembered to indicate me as the beneficiary of his 401k plan.
Or my personal favorites, the housewives.
Over time, my husband will desire me less sexually, but he will always enjoy my pies.
I am making a pie.
I hope you are not trying to steal my husband, tramp.
This is only one example, of course, but the game is littered with creative stuff like this based off of the individual levels. It's all great, and it's consistently funny. And while I'm on the subject of the Milkman conspiracy, I have to bring up the Milkman himself. He's one of the most iconic parts of the game, and it's so easy to see why. I can't describe what it is about this dude that makes him so memorable, but he just fits right in with the insanity of the moment and provides the perfect conclusion to the most bizarre level in the game. Just watch this madness play out.
What have you done? He wakes!
I am the milkman. My milk is delicious.
And the sea shall run white with his rage.
I am the milkman. My milk is delicious. Special delivery today. I am the milkman. My milk is delicious.
Boyd? Are you okay?
Time for the final delivery to this address.
Hey, is that milk regular kind? Or the exploding dream kind?
It's fortified with what the world wants. What the world deserves.
Are you sure you don't want to just talk about this, Boyd?
In addition to the characters that all of the levels are based off of, there are a ton of interesting personalities across the summer camp as well. These aren't given nearly as much screen time or development for obvious reasons, but they do make for one of the most interesting background casts that I've ever seen. There are some really memorable characters here, and a ton of optional cutscenes that add funny moments to seek out if you want. Dogen is a personal favorite of mine. He's this tiny little wimp that you soon find out is one of the most dangerous beings alive. His behavior is consistently weird, but in this perfect way that fits really well with the rest of the game's sense of humor.
I would never do that. I could never kill everyone. Oh, hi, Raz.
As well written as Psychonauts is, there's no real point in playing it if it isn't fun. Thankfully, the game is pretty fun. It's a perfectly average 3D platformer from an era where those thrived, and I'd say that with a few exceptions, it holds up pretty well. The controls feel very solid. There were never any points where I felt like Raz wasn't doing what I wanted him to do. His moveset starts out pretty simple. You can only really jump and double jump when the game starts, but it's gradually expanded once you start earning these merit badges and eventually becomes quite robust. You can shoot bursts of energy, set things on fire, move objects with telekinesis, turn invisible, and so much more. Once you unlock levitation, the game becomes so much more fun. You essentially summon this giant psychic ball to roll on that lets you move way faster and jump way higher, at the cost of precision. In the later areas of the game, using this to your advantage is so much fun. It lets you think of more creative ways to jump through a lot of the obstacles, and it never gets old. One problem that I find pretty common in a lot of 3D platformers is that most collectibles can often feel like they're there without any real purpose. Like, take Spyro the Dragon, for example. You have to collect all these gems just to fully complete every area, but you're never really rewarded for them. They're basically just here to make a number go up. Psychonauts has an equivalent to the gems in the form of these figments, and while collecting them all is still technically required for 100% completion, they constantly reward you along the way by increasing your rank. Doing this will grant you upgrades to your moveset, sometimes even entirely new abilities. This system is great. It gives you a constant incentive to keep collecting these things, other than just seeing a number get bigger. I've had almost entirely positive things to say about the gameplay so far, and that's because it genuinely is good. However, I don't think it's really all that great. I mean, it does enough to always be fun, but it doesn't really push the genre in any place that you haven't seen before. And, unfortunately, I feel like occasionally the level design and structure of the game can stand in the way of your enjoyment. This is probably where most people who have played the game would expect me to bring up the meat circus. This level is the last one in the game, and it's one of the most notoriously huge difficulty spikes in gaming. I knew about this before I even played the game, and was kinda dreading it my entire playthrough, so I was pretty surprised when I got there, and it was nowhere near as bad as I was told. In all honesty, it's actually pretty easy. There's nothing in Psychonauts that should have fans of the genre frustrated. There's just a notable amount of small annoyances that could have easily been worked out. For example, there are these mental cobwebs in every level that you can clear out with the cobweb duster, but you have to purchase it from the camp store first for an amount that is way higher than anyone would obtain naturally. This practically requires that you buy the dowsing rod and grind for a few minutes to find big chunks of arrowheads just so you can get this thing. This wouldn't really be a big deal normally, but once you get to the Milkman conspiracy, the cobweb duster becomes a requirement. You literally can't beat the level without it. This means that almost every playthrough is going to have an awkward halt right at the halfway point to grind arrowheads, and it just kills the pace. Another part that got on my nerves is the level Glorious Theater. I love the concept around it, but since the majority of the level is running around one room while randomly trying different combinations to solve one puzzle, it gets boring pretty quickly. It's painless if you know what to do, so it didn't bother me at all on my second playthrough, but it definitely wore on me the first time around. Black Velvetopia is another level that I found quite annoying at times. This is another situation like Glorious Theater, where the concept and especially the visuals here are incredible, but that same concept also makes the level a chore at times. The whole thing is awkwardly constructed around a singular alleyway, where you have to avoid the ground level because of a rampaging bull, but the upper levels are so awkwardly constructed, they don't feel very natural to travel across. It feels like you're constantly fighting against the level design instead of playing along with it. I do love the mini-bosses in this level though.
That's it.
Another minor complaint I have is that there are multiple bosses here where the gimmick is just to throw an object at them with telekinesis. I don't think there's anything wrong with this in concept, but I often found the execution really finicky. Whatever I throw often doesn't make contact with the boss through seemingly no fault of my own. And it certainly doesn't help that this type of boss shows up very frequently, especially in the second half of the game. Still though, I should note that these are all just nitpicks that rarely last for over a few minutes at a time, and can mostly be ignored pretty easily. As far as the core gameplay goes, it's pretty solid throughout. I feel like I've described my opinions on Psychonauts pretty clearly at this point, but one massive question has continued to linger in the back of my mind. Why did I fall in love with this game so quickly? Yes, the writing is fantastic and the game is fun enough, but I could say the same for multiple other games, and yet none of them stuck with me nearly as hard as Psychonauts did. Even after I beat it, I couldn't stop thinking about it. All I wanted to do was experience more. I played the game again, I dug into as much external content on the game as possible, desperate to uncover every last detail of the world, and still I had no clue why the game hooked me so much until I sat down to write this review. Putting all of my thoughts into perspective, I can easily say that Psychonauts is not a perfect game. Of course, no game is perfect, but this one is notably imperfect. It's still very good, but I'd be hard-pressed to call it a masterpiece or anything like that. There's a lot of very apparent room for improvement here. What I can say with absolute confidence is that I have never played a game like Psychonauts before. From the second you see the title screen, you know exactly what type of game you're getting into here. It might not be for everyone, but it's so unique in both concept and execution that it's hard not to love if you fall in the group of people that it does appeal to. It's so easy to see why the game performed the way it did when it first released, but it's equally clear why it resonated so much with its fans. Of course, individual aspects of the game can be compared to other games, but taken as a whole package, there's just nothing else like it. Psychonauts is Psychonauts, nothing else is and nothing else will be. The passion that the team at Double Fine had for this project is nothing short of astounding. This doesn't feel like a product that developers worked on because it was their job. No, it feels like a piece of art that a passionate group of people desperately wanted to create and would do so no matter the cost. It doesn't surprise me that Microsoft tried to interfere with the project during its development, and honestly, it might have turned out better if they had. Maybe the game wouldn't have been such a flop financially. Maybe its issues wouldn't be so outwardly obvious. but it wouldn't have been the game that the team at Double Fine wanted to make, and that's why I'm so glad we got what we did. One last thing, if you're interested in playing the game for yourself, I can't urge you enough to give it a shot, but I should warn you to stay away from the PlayStation versions if possible. It's a perfectly playable version of the game, I mean it's how I played it, but it's also an incredibly inferior port. The PlayStation versions, no matter what console, are always direct emulations of the PS2 original, which wouldn't be a problem if the original PS2 version weren't already a severe downgrade of the original Xbox version. My second time around I played the Steam port, and the game looked and felt significantly better. And since it's a game from over 15 years ago, it can run on pretty much anything at this point. Again, if you only have PlayStation systems and don't own a capable PC, PlayStation version is totally playable, but if you have any other option available, I would recommend that you take it. Regardless of the version you played, Psychonauts is an incredible experience and one that I absolutely loved. It may not be perfect by any means, but it is without a doubt one of the most special and unique games that I have ever played. I really wish I hadn't put this one off for so long. I'm so happy that I finally got around to playing it.